The night was supposed to be quiet, just another evening where a hard-working woman walked home under the soft glow of streetlights. But in a moment, everything changed. A group of men, hiding in the shadows, decided to turn her peace into fear. They didn't know her name, they didn't know her story, and most of all, they didn't know who she was connected to. To them, she was just another target. But what they failed to realize was that this woman's life was tied to someone who had faced some of the world's darkest battles and lived to tell the story. Her name was Maya, a woman full of strength, dignity, and a quiet kind of power. She had stood tall through life's trials, but that night, the world seemed determined to test her one more time. As she tried to reason with her captors, their arrogance grew, and they made a decision that would set off a chain of events none of them could have imagined. While the men laughed, convinced they had all the control, Maya's mind was already racing, because unlike anyone else in that moment, she knew she wasn't truly alone. With trembling hands, but a steady spirit, Maya managed to reach for her phone. A single call, just one. It was all she needed. On the other end of the line was her husband, a man who had spent years in the shadows of secret missions, trained for situations most people couldn't even imagine. His name was Daniel, a member of Delta Force, a soldier forged by discipline and defined by loyalty. To the world, he was invisible. But to Maya, he was everything. And to those men who thought they could break her, he was about to become their worst mistake. The sound of her voice through the phone was calm, but Daniel knew better. He could sense the fear beneath her steady words. He didn't ask too many questions. He didn't waste time. The years of training kicked in like instinct. Every breath he took after that call was focused on one thing: reaching her before it was too late. The men around Maya had no idea that the balance of power had already shifted. They thought they were in control, but in reality, the clock was ticking, and each passing second brought something closer, something they were not ready for. Because when Daniel moved, he moved with precision. And when he came, he never came unprepared. What happens when a soldier trained for war comes face to face with the people foolish enough to threaten the woman he loves? That answer was only moments away. Daniel had always been a man of few words. Years of service had shaped him into someone who didn't speak unless it mattered. To those outside, he was just a quiet neighbor, the man who waved politely but never lingered in long conversations. Few knew his past, and even fewer understood the kind of life he had led. He wasn't just a soldier, he was part of Delta Force, an elite unit trusted with missions so delicate they were never spoken of. His world was one of shadows, codes, and precision. But away from the battlefield, with Maya, he was simply a husband who cherished the woman who had given him peace after a lifetime of chaos. Their love story was nothing short of remarkable. Daniel had met Maya years earlier when he returned from a mission overseas. She wasn't impressed by titles or tales of combat. She saw through the hardened shell to the man who longed for a home, for someone to see him as more than just a soldier. Maya was strong in her own right, a teacher who believed in shaping young lives and protecting her community. Where Daniel's world was defined by secrecy and danger, hers was rooted in compassion and hope. Together, they found balance. She softened him, and he made her feel safe. But that night, everything they had built together was being tested. As Maya stood under the cold night sky, she could feel the cruel laughter of the men echoing in her ears. They had no idea who her husband was. No clue that every decision they made was pulling them closer to a storm they could never control. Maya's heart raced, but she forced herself to stay calm. Daniel had always told her that fear gave power to the enemy. Courage, even in silence, was stronger. Meanwhile, Daniel's mind was racing in a different way. He had mapped cities, terrains, and hostile zones all over the world. But now, his mission was personal. He knew he couldn't call in backup, couldn't wait for authorities to move at their own pace. This wasn't about procedure. It was about love, loyalty, and survival. He traced her voice, replayed every word she had spoken on the phone, looking for clues. Every second mattered, and Daniel was not a man who wasted seconds. Back in the shadows, the men around Maya felt untouchable. They saw her as powerless, unaware that every heartbeat was bringing something closer, something they could not see or predict. Daniel wasn't just coming as a soldier, he was coming as a husband, and when those two parts of him collided, there would be no stopping him. The question wasn't if he would find her. The question was how much these men would regret ever crossing his path. The city around them carried on as if nothing unusual was happening. Cars rolled past, lights flickered in apartment windows, and people hurried home without realizing a silent battle was already taking shape just a few streets away. For Maya, every sound felt sharper, every second heavier. She kept her breathing steady, remembering Daniel's words, but the weight of the unknown pressed against her chest. The men thought their actions were hidden, that no one would notice a woman cornered in the dark. What they didn't know was that they had just stepped into a story much bigger than themselves. Daniel moved quickly, but his steps were calculated. He wasn't just a man rushing to save his wife. He was trained to see angles, to predict danger, to read the environment as if it were a battlefield. He replayed maps of the area in his mind, recalling shortcuts and alleyways. Every piece of his training, every hard lesson from years in service, now pointed toward one, Maya still. There was one thing different about this operation. It wasn't an enemy base or foreign terrain. This was home, and Daniel knew that made things more dangerous in ways outsiders couldn't understand. While Maya battled her fear, another layer of conflict was unfolding. Among the men holding her, there wasn't perfect unity. Two of them whispered in hushed voices, their tones uneasy. One seemed to think things had already gone too far, but the others pushed forward with arrogance, blind to the storm heading their way. That small crack between them might have been nothing in another moment, but in a situation this fragile, even doubt could become a turning point. Maya noticed it too. She caught the nervous glances, the hesitation in one man's eyes. She didn't know how to use it yet, but she stored it in her mind, the way Daniel had taught her to pay attention to details others missed. Far from the scene, Daniel reached out to a single, trusted contact, an old teammate from his Delta Force days who now lived a quieter life. He didn't give details, didn't mention names, but he asked for one thing: information. Within minutes, Daniel had a clearer picture of the group he was up against. They weren't just random men from the streets. They had a history of intimidation, always picking the vulnerable, always thinking no one would push back. What they didn't know was at this time, their pattern had led them into the wrong story. Tension grew thicker with every passing moment. Maya's strength was tested as the men's laughter rose and fell, but behind her calm eyes, she clung to one truth: Daniel was coming. And when he did, the night would no longer belong to them. It was only a matter of time before the quiet city streets would witness a reckoning no one had planned for. The night air grew heavier, almost as if it sensed what was about to unfold. Maya stood still, every nerve in her body awake, her thoughts sharp and focused. She had lived long enough with Daniel to know one thing with certainty: when he said he would come, he always did. The waiting was the hardest part. She could feel the men circling her, their confidence filling the silence. They thought time was on their side, but for Maya, time was the one thread keeping her hope alive. Each passing minute meant Daniel was closer, moving with purpose, closing in on them like a shadow they couldn't see. Daniel's pace quickened as he turned down another dark alley, his mind locked on every sound. He knew he was getting close. The faint echo of laughter carried through the still night, and his pulse tightened. Every instinct screamed that this was it. His training reminded him to measure his moves, but the husband in him battled with urgency. The tension inside him was a storm, but he let it fuel his steps, steady and deliberate. He couldn't afford mistakes, not now. Back at the scene, Maya's eyes caught the hesitation again in one of the men. He avoided looking directly at her, his voice uncertain when he spoke to the others. She recognized that fear wasn't only hers anymore, it was his too. That small crack gave her strength. She straightened her back, her silence becoming louder than their noise. Though she didn't speak, her presence seemed to shift something in the air. It was the kind of quiet resilience Daniel always admired in her, the kind that unnerved anyone who underestimated her. At the same time, Daniel's old teammate fed him one final piece of information over a brief call. The group had a reputation, but they also had blind spots. They were careless in their arrogance, leaving patterns behind. That knowledge gave Daniel the edge he needed. He cut across a side street, his mind already plotting the approach, his movements blending into the shadows. He could almost hear Maya's voice in his memory, calm yet urgent. The unspoken bond between them, pulling him closer with every step. The men's laughter began to fade into restless chatter. Even without knowing why, they could feel something shifting, something they couldn't name. The confidence that had filled them at the start now wavered as the night seemed to grow colder, the silence pressing in tighter. Maya felt it too, not fear this time, but anticipation. She knew that moment was coming, the one when the balance of power would flip. Daniel was near, so near that the space between him and Maya was shrinking with every silent move. The stage was set, the tension stretched to its limit, and as the night held its breath, everything pointed to one inevitable collision that was about to change. Everything. Just when the air felt ready to shatter with tension, another layer of danger revealed itself. Daniel was only moments away, but as he drew closer, he noticed something he hadn't expected. A second group of figures lingered in the distance, watching quietly from the shadows. They weren't part of the laughing crowd around Maya. Their posture was different, colder, more calculating. These weren't men fueled by arrogance, they looked organized. That realization stopped Daniel for a split second. The situation wasn't just about a reckless group harassing his wife. Something larger was in motion, and Maya had been caught in the center of it. Maya sensed it too. Out of the corner of her eye, she spotted movement beyond the men already surrounding her. A black SUV sat parked further down the road, engine humming, lights off. She couldn't make out the faces, but she felt the weight of eyes fixed on her. For a moment, her breath caught. This wasn't just random intimidation, it was planned. The men who tied her down weren't acting alone, they were pawns. That revelation sent a chill deeper than the night air. Daniel's mind sharpened instantly. He had seen this pattern before: one group causing the noise, the distraction, while another group stayed in the dark, pulling the strings. It meant the danger wasn't just immediate, it was layered. designed to test reactions and control outcomes. But what were they after? Why Maya? His jaw tightened as he realized this wasn't a coincidence. Someone wanted leverage, and they had chosen the wrong family to test. The men around Maya began to grow uneasy, not because they understood the full scale of what was happening, but because they felt the shift in her presence. She wasn't breaking, she wasn't pleading, and that frightened them more than anything. One of them finally snapped, raising his voice, trying to reassert control. But the moment he did, the headlights of the SUV flicked on, blinding everyone for a brief second. Silence fell. Even the arrogant ones stopped laughing, their confidence dissolving into confusion. Maya's pulse quickened. This new twist added another layer of fear, but also another layer of resolve. She had no doubt Daniel was close, but now she wondered if he was walking into something even bigger than either of them expected. From the shadows, Daniel crouched low, his instincts on fire. He knew he had to act, but rushing blindly could cost everything. He steadied his breathing, calculating, preparing. The stakes had just risen, and the line between victory and disaster was razor thin. What had started as a reckless act by a gang had transformed into something far more dangerous. And with every second that passed, the trap grew tighter, waiting for Daniel to make his move. The glare of the SUV's headlights froze the street in an eerie stillness. For a breathless moment, no one moved. Maya stood tall, her heart racing, but her spirit unbroken. The men who had cornered her shifted nervously, their earlier confidence unraveling. They weren't sure whether the sudden light was friend or foe, but Daniel knew exactly what it meant. It was a signal that someone else was orchestrating this from the shadows. He couldn't wait any longer. With silent precision, Daniel moved. In years of Delta Force training guided every step, every breath. In seconds, he closed the distance. His presence felt before it was even seen. The first man turned, startled, but Daniel was faster. He disarmed him with a swift, practiced motion, sending him sprawling before the others even understood what was happening. Chaos erupted, but Daniel thrived in chaos. Each movement was deliberate, controlled, his focus locked on Maya. The gang scrambled, their bravado gone, as they realized they were no match for the storm that had just descended on them. One by one, they fell back, the cracks in their unity widening into panic. Maya's eyes locked on Daniel's, a silent exchange of strength passing between them. She had held on, and he had come, just as he promised. Relief washed through her, but it lasted only a moment, because the SUV doors swung open. Out stepped men who were nothing like the reckless gang. Their movements were disciplined, their eyes sharp. This was no street-level intimidation anymore. These men were professionals. Daniel instantly recognized it. This wasn't random. It had been a trap all along. Maya wasn't just a target. She was bait. Whoever was behind this had wanted Daniel to reveal himself. The realization hit hard, but Daniel didn't falter. He positioned himself between Maya and the approaching figures, his body a shield, his mind racing. He had faced ambushes before, but this was different. It was personal. The men from the SUV closed in, confident, certain their plan had worked. But what they underestimated was the one thing Daniel carried that no training manual could prepare them for: his resolve to protect Maya at any cost. In the tense silence that followed, Daniel made his move. Quick, precise, and unstoppable. He turned the trap against them. The fight was fierce, every second carrying the weight of life and death. But his skill and determination tore through the carefully laid plan. When the dust settled, the gang was broken. The professionals scattered, their mission undone. Maya rushed into his arms, her strength meeting his. They had survived. But as Daniel scanned the scene, a final, unsettling thought struck him. Whoever had sent those men hadn't shown their face. This wasn't over. It was only the beginning of something larger, something that would reach far beyond this single night. And as he held Maya close, Daniel knew the fight they had stumbled into was only just beginning. The street was silent again, but the silence no longer felt threatening. It was the quiet that followed a storm, heavy with what had just happened but also filled with relief. Maya leaned into Daniel, her heartbeat slowly steadying as she drew strength from his embrace. For a moment, all that mattered was that they were together, alive, and safe. Daniel didn't speak right away. His eyes moved across the scene, making sure no hidden danger remained, his instincts unwilling to rest even now. Only when he was certain the threat was gone did he let himself breathe fully. The gang members who had started it all were no longer standing tall. Their arrogance had dissolved, replaced by fear they would never forget. The men from the SUV had retreated, leaving behind more questions than answers. But one truth was clear: they hadn't expected to face someone like Daniel. What was meant to be a simple show of power had turned into their defeat, and word of it would spread. For Maya, that knowledge was both comforting and unsettling. She knew they were safe for tonight, but she also knew this night had exposed something much bigger than she ever imagined. That as they walked home together, Maya found her voice. She asked Daniel the question that had been circling in her mind since the SUV appeared. Why me? Why us? Daniel paused before answering, his tone calm but firm. He explained that sometimes power hides in the shadows, targeting the innocent to draw out those they cannot reach directly. This wasn't about her. He told her it was about him, his past, his choices, and the kind of enemies that came with being who he was. But he reminded her of something more important. No matter how strong the enemy, his greatest mission was always her safety. Back at home, Maya sat in the quiet of their living room, the familiar space grounding her after the chaos. She thought about how fragile life could feel, and how quickly ordinary moments could shatter. Yet she also thought about resilience, about the way courage shows up not in the absence of fear, but in the choice to keep standing despite it. Daniel, though hardened by years of conflict, shared the same reflection. Protecting Maya reminded him why he fought at all, not for missions, not for orders, but for love and family. The night ended not with more fear, but with clarity. The threat had passed, the danger had been faced, and while larger questions lingered, the lesson was simple. Strength isn't only in combat or skill, it's in loyalty, in standing for those you love, and in refusing to let fear define your story. For Maya and Daniel, the battle had been survived, and their bond had only grown stronger. Whatever came next, they knew they would face it the same way they had faced everything else together.